Hello, this is Michael Tracy. And this video is going to look at how an adventure consultant's Sherpa turning around just 2 hours into the climb caused delays in getting the adventure consultant's oxygen into place. But if you don't remember reading about that Sherpa turning around in Jon Krakauer's best-selling book, Into Thin Air, that is because he left that part out. For viewers of the Mountain Madness oxygen video, you recall that all the accounts of the Mountain Madness oxygen agreed on what happened. That is, Bukrev, Krakauer, Beitelman, Gamelgard, they all agree about the oxygen. In contrast, on the adventure consultant side, there are 4 published accounts, all of which disagree to some extent, and 3 of them disagree on a key point. The 3 that disagree on a key point are Jon Krakauer's Into Thin Air, Michael Groom's Sheer Will, and the initial count in the Himalayan database, which appears to have been written by the base camp manager. I'll start with Krakauer's account in Into Thin Air. Krakauer lists a total of 15 people on the adventure consultants team that headed out from South Col, 8 clients, 3 guides, and 4 Sherpa. Now, if you watch the Mountain Madness oxygen video, you see the obvious problem with Krakauer's account. The Sherpas would be overloaded with oxygen. First, some terminology. When Sherpa climb, they both carry oxygen for others to use and oxygen for their own use. No Sherpa or guides on adventure consultants were climbing without oxygen. So when I refer to a Sherpa's load, it will be the number of bottles they are carrying for others and the numbers they are carrying for themselves. Thus, 3 and 1 means a Sherpa is carrying a total of 4 bottles, 3 of which they will deposit at South Summit, and 1 they are using for themselves. 2 and 2 means they are carrying 2 bottles up to South Summit and using 2 for themselves. A Sherpa carrying 3 and 1 will not proceed to the summit. They will just drop their load at South Summit and head back, as 1 bottle is not sufficient to make the summit and return. Sherpa carrying 2 and 2 are either able to summit, if they feel fit enough, or turn their oxygen up and use 2 bottles to reach South Summit and return. When a Sherpa is climbing to the summit on 2 and 2, they will carry the bottles to South Summit, drop 2 full bottles, and switch their partial bottle for their second full bottle. This is referred to as oxygen bottle caching. They will then pick up their partial bottle on the descent and switch back to it once their other bottle runs out. This ensures that the Sherpa don't run out of oxygen above South Summit. Back to Krakauer's version, just assuming it is true, it would mean that Rob Hall deliberately chose to overload his Sherpa and not allow any of the junior Sherpa to summit. That is, 4 Sherpa need to carry 11 extra bottles up to South Summit, as there are 8 clients and 3 guides that all require an additional bottle. This means 3 Sherpa need to climb 3 and 1, and Ann Dorje needs to climb 2 and 2, so that a total of 11 bottles can be placed at South Summit. But Ann Dorje didn't climb 2 and 2, as he was out in front carrying and fixing the ropes. So something is very wrong with Krakauer's account. Unlike Anatoly Bukrev, Krakauer never states how much each Sherpa carried. Krakauer did state a total of 55 bottles were brought up to South Col, but that people were already using them in the tents. Compare this to the 62 that Neil Beitelman reported being stocked for Mountain Madness's smaller team, with 2 members not using oxygen. Understanding that Krakauer's account of just 4 Sherpas leading South Col is fake journalism, we can piece together what actually happened by looking at the accounts of Mike Groom and the account in the Himalayan database. Mike Groom reports that it was not 4 Sherpa, but rather 5 that headed out from South Col. As a note, Groom mistakenly lists a single Sherpa, Lakpa Shearing, as 2 Sherpa, Lakpa and Shearing. That is just a typo in his book, as he clearly states there are 5 Sherpa in the next paragraph. There simply should not be a comma between Lakpa and Shearing. Later in the book, he also identifies Ann Dorje and Lakpa Shearing as the 2 Sherpa who attempted to climb back up to Rob Hall, but were unsuccessful. The difference between Krakauer's account and Groom's account is that Krakauer has children remaining in camp, and Groom has him leaving as part of the summit push. Of those 2, Groom's account is believable because he has adventure consultants heading out with 5 Sherpa, leaving 1 in South Col to melt snow for the returning climbers. With 5 Sherpa, none of the Sherpa are overloaded, and there is enough oxygen for both Ann Dorje and Norbu to reach the summit. It also has Ann Dorje only taking 2 bottles for himself, as he is carrying the rope to fix the route. Norbu will climb 2 and 2, as he is set to go to the summit. The others will climb 3 and 1. This gives 11 bottles being carried in normal configurations. Thus, I believe Groom's account and not Jon Krakauer's. We will see if Krakauer corrects his version in his upcoming corrections to his book. Michael Groom does not report what happens to children, but the Himalayan database reports that about 2 hours into the climb, Frank Fischbeck and one Sherpa turned around. Later, children would turn up, getting carbon monoxide poisoning at South Col, so he either never left camp, as Krakauer has it, or left and returned, as the combination of Groom and Himalayan database have it. You can make up your own decision about which version to believe, but your choice is that either Rob Hall made a deliberate decision to overload the Sherpa prior to departing, or that decision was forced upon him 2 hours into the climb when Choldum turned around. In either case, the resulting situation explains why the adventure consultant Sherpa were so slow in getting the oxygen in place. They were overloaded. Recall that adventure consultants left about 30 minutes prior to Mountain Madness, and yet the Mountain Madness team passed adventure consultants at the balcony, and the Mountain Madness Sherpa got to South Summit well in advance of the adventure consultant Sherpa. There's a simple explanation for this. The adventure consultants were overloaded with oxygen. Here is how it took place using a combination of Groom's account and the Himalayan database. Adventure Consultants heads out with normally loaded Sherpa, with Dorje climbing 0 and 2 as he has the rope and will be fixing the route. Norbu is climbing 2 and 2 as he will go to the summit. The other 3 are climbing 3 and 1, which means a total of 11 bottles that are going to South Summit. 2 hours in, Choldum turns around, which means he has 3 bottles which needs to go to other Sherpa. Dorje is out in front and is unaware of this, as is Mike Groom. Thus, there are 3 Sherpas still in the rear and 3 extra bottles. It appears that Rob Hall distributed 2 of the bottles to the Sherpa and likely took 1 of the bottles himself. This is based on his rather slow ascent rate prior to South Summit and this passage from Lou Koschitzky's After the Wind. This is when they are climbing below the balcony, but it would have been after the 2-hour mark. We then climbed a section that looked like terraced shelves of broken shale. It was strange terrain, and on one occasion I sat down on one of the shelves to rest. It was during this moment that I looked back and saw Rob coming up, and he did something that struck me. He made his move to the next rock shelf by putting one knee up and then the other, and then standing. This was a move you would not expect from someone of Rob's skill level. I also noticed he was shaking and looked cold. I thought Rob might be having a problem. While there is no definitive proof that Rob Hall took a bottle from Choldum, if he did not, then the bottle was given to one of the remaining Sherpa, and they were all carrying 5 bottles at that point, which is way overloaded. With one of the Sherpa carrying 4 bottles, they could at least rotate the loads at the balcony and perhaps below the steep part of South Summit so that it was not always the same 2 Sherpa carrying 5 bottles the entire time. Rob Hall would deposit 1 bottle at the balcony, but the Sherpa would not. That would leave Rob Hall climbing with 2 bottles above the balcony, but other climbers and guides, such as Mike Groom, were climbing with only 1 bottle above the balcony. Frank Fischbeck was not going to use his 3rd bottle, but it does not appear that the bottle was sent down because there were no reserves reported later when people were returning. Recall that unlike Mountain Madness, Adventure Consultants was pressed to the limit on oxygen supplies because of a last-minute addition of a non-paying client after the oxygen had already been ordered. This non-paying client, John Krakauer, was originally supposed to climb with Mountain Madness, who had ordered additional oxygen for his use. Thus, on Summit Day, Mountain Madness had the extra oxygen from a client that didn't climb with them, and Adventure Consultants had no reserves because all the oxygen was allocated to the non-paying client, John Krakauer. The key to understanding the oxygen situation for Adventure Consultants is understanding that one of the Sherpa turned around about 2 hours into the climb, as reported in the Himalayan database. For some unknown reason, Krakauer chose not to report this and instead simply list only 4 Sherpa as departing from South Col, which would have been a serious mistake on Rob Hall's part. Curiously, Krakauer also does not mention to his readers that having only 4 Sherpa carrying that much oxygen would mean they would be seriously slow, and if Dorje was indeed loaded up with more than 2 bottles, he would be completely ineffective in fixing any rope in advance of anyone. Thus, my criticism of Krakauer is not what he did on the climb. It is what he wrote in his book. He reported a key detail as fact when it differed significantly from Mike Groom's account and that of the Himalayan database. And even if Krakauer's version was true, it would be obvious to somebody familiar with high-altitude climbing that 4 Sherpas can't easily carry oxygen for 11 members and also have one of the Sherpa fix ropes. Thus, accepting everything Krakauer wrote as true, he should have pointed out to his readers who are not familiar with high-altitude mountaineering the serious problem with only having 4 Sherpa. There was no way the adventure consultant Sherpa could get the oxygen in place for the 1 p.m. turnaround time. And expecting Anne Dorje to both carry a full load of oxygen, 4 bottles, and fix ropes would have been the height of folly, as it is too difficult to believe that Rob Hall made such a serious error in judgment when he had an extra Sherpa to send, and Mike Groom reported that Sherpa did indeed depart South Col. I do not believe Krakauer's account that only 4 Sherpa left South Col. This leaves a major problem just 2 hours into the climb, being a Sherpa turning around. That had nothing to do with the experience level of Rob Hall's clients. It had nothing to do with a socialite climber on a different team. Adventure consultant Sherpa were overloaded just 2 hours into the climb and would not be able to get the oxygen in place in time for the 1 p.m. turnaround. Now, we are in a bit of an awkward situation where there are so many errors in Krakauer's book, and he claims he will fix them. Thus, I will forego the full analysis of the adventure consultant's oxygen situation at this time because Krakauer could provide additional verifiable facts that match up with other accounts or are supported by photographic evidence. However, long gone are the days of people believing something just because Krakauer says so. It is no mystery that oxygen and Sherpas are the key to modern climbers reaching the summit. Anatoly Bukrev understood this and provided complete details of the Mountain Madness oxygen situation and how the Sherpas were employed to get it into place. In contrast, Krakauer says nothing about the oxygen loads of the Sherpas, and his account is different from both Groom's and the Himalayan database. From the oxygen situation, we can answer the question of why adventure consultants had 4 deaths and Mountain Madness only 1. The oxygen load, we know, is 11 Western climbers carrying 2 bottles each for a total of 22 bottles for adventure consultants. The smaller Mountain Madness team's original plan was to go with 42 bottles, even though they had only 6 clients compared to Rob Hall's 8. So just to start out with the same number of bottles as Mountain Madness had planned, adventure consultants would need 20 bottles between 4 Sherpa or 5 bottles per Sherpa. Now, Lopside made the last-minute decision to only go with 5 Sherpa, so Mountain Madness headed out with only 38 bottles, but that left significant oxygen in reserve at South Col, oxygen with Bukrev used to rescue the climbers. And here we see how Rob Hall's desire to go first was a poor decision. Adventure consultants was stretched on oxygen and Sherpa support. They should not have gone first nor allowed their guides to get so far in front of the Sherpas, as adventure consultants had no room for errors or Sherpas needing to turn around. In contrast, Mountain Madness could have had a Sherpa turn around and not have it be a significant impact. Adventure consultants had no such luxury. As soon as Childam turned around, Rob Hall should have radioed up to Anne Dorje, telling him of the problem, and that Anne Dorje would probably need to work as a high-altitude porter and not go on to the summit. Rob Hall should have also informed Fisher's team as they were passing that he was short a Sherpa and that Mountain Madness would need to take the lead and fix any rope that needed to be fixed. But this would present some bad optics for the competing teams. Although a rivalry between the teams is frequently mentioned, the only thing Krakauer attributes to this is Rob Hall moving the turnaround time. But Rob Hall didn't change his 1 p.m. turnaround time because of a rivalry. He changed it because 5 of his clients turned around, resulting in surplus oxygen for the remaining 3. Instead, the rivalry caused real and easy to understand problems. Rob Hall wanted his team to reach the summit first so it would be reported on by the non-paying promotional writer whose climb he was subsidizing. Thus, his decision to head out in front of Mountain Madness was misguided to begin with because Adventure Consultants was already stretched thin on oxygen and Sherpa support. The next problem the rivalry caused was that Rob didn't want to ask for help once his Sherpa turned around. This has nothing to do with altitude. It is common when there are problems for businesses to tell their clients that everything is fine. Rob Hall should have radioed up that a Sherpa had turned around. Of course, then the clients would hear that on the radio, as all the guys had radios. Rob should have then just let the Mountain Madness team pass as he redistributed the oxygen. He could have had Anne Dorje carry additional oxygen and hand Anne Dorje's rope off to Scott Fisher's team. Instead, Anne Dorje didn't take any additional oxygen and was still assisting in fixing ropes that could easily have been handled by Bukrev and Beitelman had they simply been told about the problem. At that point, the race to the summit would have been over. Mountain Madness was going to get there first, so there wouldn't be any issue. But Rob Hall wanted his non-paying client to still be out in front And that part of the rivalry was a significant factor in the disaster that unfolded. And while we were on the subject of correcting Krakauer's book, there is page 269, where he says that the 4 adventure consultant Sherpas could not assist in the rescue effort because they were too tired from going to the summit. And the other 4 Sherpa on our team were too cold and debilitated from having gone to the summit. Now, John, you know that is not true, because you wrote that 2 of them turned around on page 226. A brief discussion ensued. Koschitzky was initially reluctant to concede defeat, but Tasky and Hutchinson were persuasive. At 11:30, the 3 men turned their backs on the summit and headed down, and Hall sent Sherpas Cami and Lochbacherian down with them. But even that is not true. Let's look at the 2 factual statements Krakauer made in those 2 sentences. First, at 11:30, 3 people turned around. That is not true. Koschitzky turned around after Tasky and Hutchinson, and it was not because he was persuaded by either of them. This is described in Koschitzky's After the Wind. And 2, that Rob Hall sent Cami and Lochbacherian down with them. That is also not true. Both those Sherpas were carrying loads to South Summit and were never supposed to climb higher than South Summit because they didn't have enough oxygen. Koschitzky says they didn't descend with any Sherpa, and that he later noticed that Lochba had caught up and quickly passed them. Thus, Rob Hall didn't send any Sherpa down with 3 clients that turned around below South Summit. The Sherpa turned around after they had deposited their load at South Summit, as had been the plan all along. So for factual statements about the Sherpa's movements, Krakauer is 0 for 3 in this video, and we are all looking forward to his numerous corrections to his book. The reason the 2 climbing Sherpa were tired is not because they went to the summit. It is because they were overloaded on oxygen they needed to carry up to South Summit. In addition, Choldum and Arita got carbon monoxide poisoning while melting snow in South Col, which Krakauer does note in his book, but he felt a Sherpa on a different team allegedly being tired was more of a factor than 2 Sherpa on adventure consultants, one of whom was designated as the emergency reserve, becoming debilitated by carbon monoxide poisoning. Ultimately, this leads to the following list of Sherpa who summited: 4 from Mountain Madness, 2 from Adventure Consultants, and 2 from the Taiwanese team. From that, we can probably piece together why there was an oxygen problem at South Summit, and I'll cover that in the final analysis video.